It is a whole set of activities that, as the title says, eventually needs to lead to action. Why the PPVC would is short for that, or the reason it stands on its own, is primarily because policy and investments, they are not separable. And that means government and private sector, or all other stakeholders in the society. But in this case, it's primarily to say the prioritization component emphasizes the fact that given a whole host of recommendations, the priorities and activities of government, if you do all of them, you probably are doing nothing. But if you pick some for whatever justification, then you are able to report on progress. And generally, some of the studies, some of the approaches similar to the ones that we're doing is that emphasis and focus tends to be more on the farm, agriculture, but if we are to make impact, and this also came in the pre-conference workshops where the importance of the agri-food system, the impacts beyond that, even though the seed may be planted on the farm, the fruits are all over the villages, the country, and the world. And the value, the impact, and the changes that those fruits are making, if they are not recorded, then we are missing some of the important elements of where those investments and policy dynamics go to. And finally, it's just the market dynamics are critical in terms of sustainability and ensuring that the projects and the deliverables, the impacts and the pathways are sustainable. We can't leave the market out of this dynamics. So for government in particular, reliance on policy or on evidence that is generated, be it from the data to the analytics, as I said, the program and projects is a partnership starting with the researchers up to the community, and therefore they are part of the process in doing so. So at the end of the day, the selection or the implementation is based on those outcomes that are supported and grounded on research. Quickly, just going past this slide is just to say, it is branded and market-led, in other words, and not necessarily to say it is superior to other approaches that emphasizes on the supply side and push the product through to the market. But the PPVC starts from the market basically to say, if we have the market, we can identify the market, we can be competitive in those markets. How do we bring in the smallholder farmers? How do we bring in other players and stakeholders in the very same market to access, to compete, and to sustain that over time? And that way is also to allow government resources, which by very nature they are limited, they can focus elsewhere as opposed to supporting the farmers through and through, while the market can play the same role, but also making them competitive. And the third point is that when the government, which is the public sector, and the private sector, as well as all other stakeholders, work together throughout these processes, and the investment is really brought in from the private sector due to the market dynamics that I've mentioned, then you start seeing the contribution or the share of contribution by them from a developing country perspective starting to change, starting to shift from government-dominated support as the smallholders or the farmers in general, as well as the private sector, participate, then relieving some of those resources by government to focus on many other needs that each and every country faces. So I would like to maybe stop here, and before I invite the next person on the podium, just basically to illustrate how far this PPVC has been in place going back to 2017, and today we will be listening to the cases of the recent countries to join, to implement and engage the stakeholders in their countries, which is Ghana and Zambia, for the rest of the remaining period. But in that journey, as I said, is collaborative. It involves many stakeholders. One of those that we had throughout this period is the Gates Foundation. And it gives me great pleasure as I invite Alan, but I'll just do 2 lines of introduction. As a senior program officer responsible for agricultural development, he's been our friend, our partner, and someone who has been asking us difficult questions in this journey. But he's also doing the same with other, organizations, international ones, who are playing in the same space or slightly different, but with the purpose of changing lives, creating pathways for success. And I can mention in the same group as ANAPRI, we have the FAO and AGRA, IFPRIS, World Bank, who have also journeyed with the Gates Foundation under the leadership of Alan. So Alan, it gives me a great pleasure to invite you to share your experiences on this journey with us. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Matlo. Good morning, everybody. As Matlo briefly mentioned there, so I'm Alan Renison from the Gates Foundation based in Seattle. I work in our agricultural development team, and I'm responsible for our work in agricultural policy, and that, as Matlo mentioned, involves working with ANAPRI, working with FAO, IFPRI, the World Bank, AGRA, all with a common goal of providing data, analytics, evidence to support better policy making, recognizing this challenge that governments across the continent face in that they have to deliver multiple policy objectives through their agriculture sector. So poverty reduction, jobs, growth, dietary improvement, women's empowerment, climate adaptation, food security. As I mentioned on the stage a couple of days ago, that's a very tough set of policy objectives to try to deliver for any government in the world, far less governments that are very resource constrained and that have very nascent private sector and so on. And so PPVC, as it shows on the slide there, has been a journey, and the latest part of that journey is applying the PPVC approach in Zambia and in Ghana, and looking forward to hearing from colleagues from IAPRI and ISR to talk about the value chains that they've been working on. And I shout about this PPVC work a lot. Not just in Seattle, but in convenings that I get to attend in London and Rome and DC and other parts of Africa. And the reason I shout about it so much is because it's having an impact. We can see that it's actually leading to private sector friendly, market-led, very targeted policy reforms that are impacting the margins of smallholder producers, local SMEs and other actors along those value chains that need to be sustainable and to click together to deliver the kind of transformational outcomes that we care about. And so we've seen examples from all of these countries, thanks to Sokoine, Tegameo, Wapata, with support from BFAP, IFPRI and others. This is working. This really is working. It's very challenging. It's quite slow. It's analytically complex. It requires a lot of partnership, a lot of patience, a lot of government engagement. But when it comes together, it's about the best example we have of impact on smallholder farmers. So I get very excited about this. I have no problem flying across the world to ANAPRI conferences every year to talk about PPVC, and really looking forward to hearing from Brian and from Andrew about the latest experiences. And what makes PPVC unique is that market-led piece, first and foremost, the focus on the private sector. But it delivers, it identifies and prioritizes packages of policy reforms, so strategically coordinated, very well-targeted packages of policy reforms. So in the donor community, it's tempting to focus on the big ticket items, fertilizer subsidies, investment in roads, big seed policies. But here we're pointing the laser at specific parts of the value chain that are not working. And we try to address those problems via good policy interventions that motivate private investment or motivate increased productivity growth on farm or whatever it is. But it's really well-targeted packages of policy reforms that are a real difference maker here. And then the second piece is tracking the market responses to those policy reforms. Now, we'll hear from ANAPRI and from ISR, and they're not yet at the point where they're tracking the market responses to those reforms, but the work that Sokoine did in Tanzania and that Tegemeo did in Kenya, that involved actually assessing the extent to which the policy reforms were making a difference to prices and volumes and margins on the ground. And that's years of work to do that tracking. But when we do that, we're able to articulate the return, quantify the return on this particular initiative, and it's pretty amazing, and it certainly gets attention in Seattle and elsewhere around the world. So I'll stop there, hand it back to Matlo to introduce the next guest, and say many thanks again to everyone's continued engagement and interest in PPVC. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Let's give him another round of applause. As the slide that is beaming at the moment, showing where it has been, it's also insufficient, or we pass our regards as well as thanks to those who played a role on this journey. We can never bring everyone on board, as you have seen in the opening slide, those who were here. But Mwapata is represented here from Malawi. We have, I've seen Lillian, Tegemeo, Sokoine was mentioned. So we quite have, Zina is here, and we have really gone through a journey, and if you want to hear beyond what Alan has said, given that today's examples and illustrations are about the journey that is ongoing, but as for past experiences and progress, if you see any of those people that I mentioned or people from those countries, just ask the question, how is it going? What do you know about it? And we would like to hear about that kind of feedback. But basically, going ahead with the rest of the program this morning, we are going to listen to the PPVC cases, illustrations, and examples from Ghana and Zambia. The case of the rice value chain in Ghana, beef and soya in Zambia. So they will each come and tell their stories, as I'm inviting Andrew to come forward. We have changed the flow a bit. Am I right? Yes. Okay. Fwasa, you come first, and then the rest of the team, Brian, Chisanga, and then Andrew will follow later with soybean and rice. So let's welcome Fwasa to the stage. I won't tell everyone this, but remember my time.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'll ride on previous protocols already observed. I have the tough task of summarizing our work on beef in Zambia in 10 minutes, so bear with me. So our work on beef and soybean has been a collaborative, iterative process, not just with our donors, but we closely collaborated with the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock in regards to beef, while soy did so with Ministry of Agriculture. So the value of the PPVC for us has been, it's helped us contextualize our ambitions, and targets. In Zambia, this was anchored in our CATS, which has value chains which it has prioritized, and we've got a list of over 13 value chains. Ideally, the PPVC framework selects the top-ranked value chains, but in our case, we picked soy, which was ranked second, and beef, that was ranked last in terms of livestock, and our choice was anchored in achieving or unlocking these value chains in line with our comprehensive agriculture support program. So that's a little bit of background as to what went into the selection of these particular value chains. So beef, our beef industry is a significant contributor to our ag growth. It contributes almost 50% to our ag GDP. And over the last decade, it's grown at almost 45%, largely driven by consumption, urbanization, and growing incomes. However, despite this growth, we only seen 2% of exports, and this has largely been to the DRC in terms of informal exports. So our ambitions in regards to beef are, one, growing the sector domestically, but two, finding regional markets and realizing better premiums for our farmers and generic stakeholders. So in doing so, the opportunities of the sector are our price, because in the region, and when compared to the major exporters into Africa, our price point is quite advantageous. And given Zambia's location, we're strategically located to countries that have got a large beef demand. Like many others, our challenges include getting our production and productivity right. We've got compounded disease issues, biosecurity, not just on farm, but throughout the value chain, market access constraints, finance, infrastructure, and so on. So a brief overview, unfortunately, in mapping out the value chain so that we could better understand the bottlenecks. We may not be able to highlight that clearly. However, our headcount between 2021 and 2025 was about 4.1 million. We used this period to address sharp fluctuations. We had COVID, the Ukraine war, and the data was quite noisy. So we used an average of that period. Our sector is largely dominated by both non-feedlot and feedlot components, and with a large private sector involvement and drive. So this bodes well for a lot of the reforms we're proposing. Domestic consumption is largely what constitutes a demand with minimal exports. So what did we propose as our reforms? In anchoring our ambitions in the CATS, the first point, given the requirements for accessing export markets, is addressing our disease burden. And in addressing our disease burden, we did not just look at disease, but we looked at issues of improving our calving rate. At present, it currently stands at 28%, national average. We also looked at productivity, production issues in that reform. We then also proposed the introduction of a transparent carcass grading and pricing system. Currently, it's largely informal, and prices are determined by an eye test and not just the weight. So, then beyond these two, we proposed an investment reform to finance infrastructure investment. So an illustration of the carcass grading card that we're proposing, we're looking at issues of age, sex, fat cover, the color of the meat, the grade label, and to distinguish the premiums in the sector. For infrastructure, we looked at we focused on the slaughtering part of the node, and we looked at the various actors that are at that particular point in the value chain. These included slaughter agents, slaughterhouses, abattoirs, meat processors, and butchers. So we did not calculate the investment of the entire infrastructure needed, but to upgrade them to a particular point at each respective node. And in doing so, we calculated that the required investment would be about 170 million US dollars. And we considered the internal rate of return, but to temper expectations, we used the modified internal rate of return, which assumes positive cash flows are reinvested at the cost of capital. And we note promising margin from 7 to 24%, which varied amongst the particular actors. However, for abattoirs, they need added incentives to recoup their investment. And for our calculation, we said they would spend this money over a 5-year period, but the recouping of the investment would take about 10 years thereabout. Then we proposed that the funds can be put together either by crowdsourcing or being implemented in already pre-existing facilities. One being the SAF, which it targets small holders or SMEs in terms of mechanization and infrastructure funding. All right. So with the reforms, what we note is that we get accelerated growth. At business as usual, we do see that growth, but it's worth noting that we then see that we're able to reach our ambitions quicker if we have this added investment and policy reform. So here we highlighting the gross margins for the various actors in the value chain, given business as usual. And we note that while we estimate that margins will increase, we note that exporters will not realize these returns, largely because of limited access, given that beef cannot be exported if our disease burden is not addressed. However, we see that, as has already been mentioned, the accelerated growth with the reform of unlocking exports and infrastructure. As you notice, in some instances, like the exporters, with the reform, there's a slight decline in infrastructure. However, this is the general trajectory is going up. One may ask why infrastructure may be important, and this is largely because adding infrastructure will help us get better premiums, given the cuts that we'll be exporting. And another note is these gross margins will not just improve because of the volumes, but also the price returns. So what does that entail when we contextualize it in terms of the map and how the beef would flow through? So we see that with improved genetics, improved productivity, improved calving rates, reduced motility, our head count will increase, and this will also be translated in the volumes put through feedlots, non-feedlot sectors, and through the slaughters. And this will also help us actualize our target exports. However, while our current national ambitions are that we export 20,000 tons annually as soon as possible. We only see this being feasible by 2034. We see a significant increase in our export from 2,000 metric tons to about 27 by 2035. So the PPVC approach, as has been mentioned earlier, is a mix of methodologies, qualitative and quantitative, quantitative being PE, the PE demand supply, which we illustrated earlier. And now I'll take you through the results we got from our CG economy-wide modeling. And we also modeled the same reforms of disease control and infrastructure. And we note increases realized not just for the value chain, but beyond the value chain and the nation at large. When we look at the infrastructure reform, while the reform here was modeled as a once-off investment, there is alignment in that the private actors will need incentives for this investment because they will not be able to recoup their investments without them. However, nationally, we will be better off for it. So we see improvements not just in the sector, as was mentioned earlier, but in terms of poverty reduction, as well as the number of people employed. So in terms of poverty reduction, these are some of the benefits. I think we lost one slide, but we also saw increases in employment growth as well, and not just poverty reduction. So key takeaways are largely the value chain will help us realize social benefits, and our export dream could become a reality. With those few words, I will pass on to Brian Chisanga for the soy presentation. Thanks.
This is going the wrong direction. Trying to get to my... Okay. Is that... Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Chisanga. I'm a research associate at ANAPRI. My task this morning is to continue from where FWASA has left. And I am talking about the PPVC work in Zambia, focusing on the soybean value chain. Let me proceed. Now, soybeans is one of Zambia's most successful value chains, which has grown rapidly over the years. Our annual production is just around about over 400,000 metric tons, and that's based on a 5-year average. And yields are just exceeding 1 ton per hectare. That's pretty low. But what you'd like to appreciate is that soybean had been a commercial farmer-dominated value chain, but just in the recent past, we've seen a high entry of small-scale farmers. But because of largely because of inefficiency in input use, you find that the yield has been trending downwards. So that remains one of the major challenges. Soybeans has been prioritized in the government policy framework with the Comprehensive Agricultural Transformation Support Program. It is one of those value chains where there is a target setting by the government. who intend to increase its production to 1 million metric tons by 2028. So that should happen by increasing smallholder farmer and commercial yields, as shown there. Okay, there are vast opportunities within the value chain. One of them is the growing demand driven by dynamics of the population, rapid per capita income growth. Soybean also has very strong linkages to the livestock sector through feed production and also to human consumed products. One of them being cooking oil, and there's also what is called the soy chunks and soy milk. These are also rapidly growing. There's rapid demand growth in the regional and international markets as well, particularly for the soybean and the meal. The meal is actually the what others call soy cake. So it's an input in the feed industry. There's also an opportunity for import substitution in Zambia because we are net importers of soybean oil, although we are net exporters of the bean and the meal. Challenges: there's low productivity, especially by the smallholder farmers. That's largely because of inappropriate farming practices and low input use. There's a lot of seed recycling, both actually for the small-scale farmers and commercial farmers. So that is a disincentive for seed companies to invest in research and development. So there's actually low use of hybrid seed. Climate variability. I wouldn't belabor this point. There's been a lot of El Nino events which constrain the sector. And then there's been a lot of private sector investments in the soybean value chain. However, they are utilizing a very small portion of their capacity, just about 33%. One of the challenges is energy supply disruptions. There's been a lot of frequent load shedding, constraining their utilization of the capacity. And also export bans. The value chain is poised to really grow, yet the government from time to time imposes export bans, which limits the growth of the soybean value chain. Now, this basically presents the current state of the soybean value chain based on our analysis within the PPVC. Now, what you see on the left side is the input side, the input side of the value chain. We see seed suppliers, fertilizer companies, producers of inoculum and various chemicals are involved in the value chain. Now, just there at the input node of the value chain, we see quite a few challenges. There's low R&D, as I've mentioned. There's inappropriate fertilizer use, particularly by smallholder farmers. And while the soils are acidic, there's very little liming going on. So this probably explains the low yields. At the production stage, you see smallholder farmers and large-scale farmers, with smallholder farmers now commanding a large share of the production. But as you see there, there's low input use. Then as we move forward on the right side of the value chain, we see at the aggregation of the trade stage, there is a large private sector investments as well as informal aggregators. And then the FRA there represents the government, who sometimes also purchase soybeans for sale to private sector. Then at the processing stage, there are large seed crushers, and these crush the soybeans mainly for the feed market. There's also the food processing, where the soybeans goes to the food market. That's the oil and the soy chunks and soy milk. So both the feed and the food market supply to the domestic and export sectors. But as I've mentioned, export restrictions do restrict the growth of the soybeans value chain. Okay, now, through our PPVC, we proposed 5 sequential reforms. And we're saying sequential because they have to follow each other, and all of them need to be implemented to realize the impacts that we envisage. So the first one is what we're calling a soy pack. that is integrating a soy pack in the e-voucher, the electronic voucher. There's already a subsidy whose focus has been mainly with maize, but we're saying let some of that subsidy be repurposed to a soy pack. So it consists of liming and fertilizer that is rich in phosphorus and potassium, as well as providing inoculants. The second one is a seed technology levy. As I mentioned, there's very little research and development going on. So there's need, we are proposing a levy where the levy itself will be given to seed companies for them to invest in research and development. The next one is assured energy supply for processors. So this will increase the processing capacity for our processors. Then we have the VAT exemption on poultry, which will increase the demand for soybeans, and then export reforms. Okay, so let me start with the policy reforms that are targeting yields. So the soy pack, as I had mentioned, includes lime and fertilizer, which is rich in phosphorus and potassium, which will address the soil acidity and nutrient deficiencies among smallholder farmers. So from our PPVC estimations, this pack will actually cost about 3.12 billion kwacha, or $142 million. So that is about 34% of the FISIP budget, or about a third of the FISIP budget. The next one is a seed technology levy, which will aim at accelerating research and development, as well as adoption of hybrid seed varieties. So we're estimating that if a 1.2% contribution from the sales of soybeans is repurposed towards research and development, that could actually improve the varieties of soybeans. But there are questions, obviously, at what point will this levy be collected? Okay, so let me look at the impacts of the two reforms that are focusing on smallholder farmers' yields that I have just described. So within the period 2010 to 2025, that's the actual yield for smallholder farmers. And then the blue line there shows the business as usual. That's if we do not do anything about the yields. The yields will be less than 1 ton per hectare. But if we implement the soy pack, the yields experience an uptick. You see that the red or pink line there kind of goes up. Then if we also implement the seed levy, we see some more additional increase in the yields. But we see that the green line delays a little bit. That is because if you invest in R&D, there's a slight delay in the impact. So basically, if we implement the soy pack and the seed levy, we see an increase in the yields from less than 1 ton per hectare to almost 1.7 tons per hectare. Okay, now I'm going to look at the expected impact of the reforms on the various actors within the value chain. So this is the absolute gross margins per node. So the first green line for each of the value chain actors is a baseline in 2035. That is business as usual if we do not implement any of those reforms. Now, let's start with the soy pack. The soy pack is that color there, the dark line, that's the second bar. So if we implement the soy pack, which is targeting commercial farmers, smallholder farmers, we see an increase in yield, but nothing changes with the commercial farmers. But as the absolute margins increase, we also see an absolute margin increase with the crushers, who are the processors, because they are obtaining the soybean from the farmers. Okay, so moving on again, if we implement the seed levy, we kind of see a drop in the margins, both for small-scale and commercial farmers. That is because of the price effect. If yield increases, first of all, from the soy pack and the seed levy, there's a decline in the prices, and so does the margins. But we see a big impact on the large-scale crushers. Okay, moving on again, the energy supply. If we implement the energy supply reform, which targets the crushers, we see an increase because it's targeting the crushers, but it also transmits to other nodes of the value chain, particularly small-scale and commercial farmers. The poultry market seems not to have a very big impact across the entire value chain. Then the ideal export seems to have a big impact across all the players within the value chain. That's because exports are really limiting the growth within the value chain. Okay. Now we look at the economy-wide impacts, and within this, we're looking at GDP gains within the value chain, as well as outside the value chain. And on the right panel, we're looking at employment changes. So as we implement each of these reforms, we see a sequential increase in the gains in terms of GDP within the value chain, and also outside the value chain, which represents the spillover effects. The same applies to the employment changes within the value chain. We see jobs being added as we sequentially implement these reforms, both within and outside the value chain. So there are also spillover effects in terms of employment. This just shows the cost versus the benefits, as we saw in the previous presentation. The dark line is the cumulative cost of implementing these interventions, and then the various...
Correctly, Ms. Cotton, behind whom we had agreed to sign a loan for her to plant the rice in the Volta Basin. But as the story is told, at the end of the day, the money, at least a portion, was squandered, and we didn't see the rice. So it's been a long way since then, probably 27 years now, and we've not seen that progress happen. And many policymakers, practitioners, and researchers like me, we are kept awake as to how we can get it done. I would like to remind you that for every cup of rice consumed in Ghana, at least half of it is imported, and that is crucial. So currently, when we consume over 1 million tons of rice, it means we are importing more than 500,000 tons of rice. Okay. So what do we do to bridge this gap between consumption and import? And that is what our PPVC work in Ghana attempts to address. We might not get it all right, but we believe it's a starting point. In the West African sub-region, we know that rice consumption is high. It has not always been... Okay, I better wait. Okay, so the consumption of rice in West Africa is quite significant. For Ghana, because of the presence of roots and tubers, rice consumption was not that high, but it has increased from the early 2000s from about 16 kilograms per person per annum to now over 40 kilograms, and that is quite significant. So it's not just population growth, but households are now consuming more rice, but we are unable to produce enough to feed them. So if you look at the first graph, the proportion of imports is quite high and it keeps on increasing, despite the fact that over the years we have increased our productivity or yields. So something is happening. Households find rice more appealing, but we can't match the pace. So what do? There are significant binding constraints within the sector, which is preventing us from meeting that need of the population. First of all, when achievable yield stands at 6 tons per hectare, we are doing just about 2.5, 3 thereabout. So how do we move to 6 tons per hectare? That is crucial. When you think about post-harvest losses, places like Vietnam are doing less than 5%. Ghana is doing 13%. If we could bring that down, it would also make rice available on the tables of consumers. So that is also crucial. Unfortunately, the rice produced in Ghana, the quality to a large extent is not comparable to those which are imported. And so some consumers also prefer the imported ones. So how do we push the quality a bit forward to ensure that we have rice that can compete with rice which comes from anywhere in the world? Of course, infrastructure deficit, as demonstrated by my colleagues from Zambia, is also crucial. So issues of irrigation infrastructure concerning, and something needs to be done about it. And the big boy in the room is finance. And rice farmers rarely get the resources behind them to do what they have to do. So what do we propose in Ghana? And what do we find? We propose 3 broad things. First, we are encouraging some expansion in irrigation, which I mentioned earlier that the results there are not so great. In our work, we model it as an expansion in the irrigated area. When we do that, we are able to increase the production by 2%. It's a modest increase. So if we increase irrigated area by 5%, we don't get so much, but we are able to cut the imports a bit. As I mentioned, the one important reform which brings bigger outcomes is the use of improved seeds and fertilizers, which helps us to increase our total production by about 1/3, and that is critical. So increasing the use of improved seeds from 35% to 50% helps us increase our production by 1/3, and I think that is instructive, and we need to pay attention. Other issues around fertilizer is also crucial, and they all support this progress. There is also the issue of poor storage infrastructure, and as I mentioned earlier on, who should bear the cost, and how should we go about it? But critically, when we improve our storage infrastructure, we are able to reduce our losses by 16%. So if we produce 100 kilograms of rice, we would have lost about 16 kilograms. Now with a good storage infrastructure, we are able to reduce that. But that is also supported by mechanization facilities, which helps us evacuate the rice from the fields as soon as possible, so that it doesn't get destroyed or compromised before milling. So the question is, these things that we are promising, are they feasible? So we do some cost-benefit analysis or some rough calculations for your consideration. First of all, the 5% increase in irrigation infrastructure means that we are bringing on board additional 3,500 hectares of irrigated land. And to do that, considering that 1 hectare of irrigation infrastructure costs $15,000, we will need about $52 million to do that. And remember that this is about 1/5 of the Ministry of Agriculture's budget. So it's quite significant. So who is going to put it on the table? Yesterday we mentioned that the development partners should look in. And so we call on them as we also look within. If you move to scenario 2, where we are arguing for improved use of improved seeds and fertilizers, we think that that is going to cost us an additional 68 million. That is also some money. And we don't need to put it out there all at once in 1 year. We can do it over 4 or 5 years so that the burden on the economy might not be too huge, but we'll still get the benefits. Finally, the storage infrastructure, which we compute to be about, let's say $1 million altogether with the mechanization. We believe that one, farmers or progressive farmers could help pay for it. The challenge is that the state has put out storage infrastructure at the district level, but it costs more to transport your produce there, to store it, and later on go for it. So if we can improve that management of those facilities, maybe we don't even need to spend. So as I conclude, I suggest that for the irrigation infrastructure, we've heard the Ministry of Energy considering putting out about 10,000 of 6 hectares unit irrigation schemes across the country, with the view that they would reduce the demand for energy on the national grid. So that solar energy thing, Ministry of Agriculture could collaborate with the Ministry of Energy to make it happen. 10,000 may be too big an ambition, but if we can even do a tenth, it will be a good start. Second, for the improvement in the use of hybrid seeds, fertilizers, etc., some progressive farmers are already doing it. How do we identify others or other neighbors who are similar and sell the idea to them so they also get on board? And that will require intensive extension which is targeted. Finally, my point on the storage facilities, we have put out about 88 new warehouses across the country, and they are not being used. And it will require someone to sit down, develop an operational procedure so we can bring them on board to support the farmers who are producing rice but do not have a place to store it. I rest my case. Thank you.
And that was an interesting case. Do we want to give the 3 presenters a round of applause one more time? They have indeed done a great job, and I believe that you've been taking some notes and some observations. One indicator of determining whether the presentations are interactive and people are paying attention is the number of clicks you hear on each and every slide. Then you know that people are paying attention, they're interested, and they want to engage. So thank you very much for that, and you can give yourself a round of applause. My 3 takeaways are, first I ended by saying there is a dream, an export dream in beef. That was interesting. Brian, on the other hand, basically said the benefits exceeds the costs for all those infrastructure and bringing it in. And as for Andrew, for some reason I believe that throughout his adult life he's been haunted by that dream to a point that he had to do something about rice even today. So that was quite fascinating, and again, that's been really quite interesting. But moving on, I think we now can go to the panels. We have a diverse panel in 3 ways. Firstly, by location, meaning that some are online and some are here. By gender, some are males and some are females. I'll stop there. And they are also diverse by the sector which they represent. So maybe just to check for those, I'll start with those who are online, introduce them, And hopefully, if they're scrapping the last coffee, then they'll just make sure that it is close by. Mr. Wandile Sitlobo was here yesterday, and he doesn't need much of an introduction. However, he's involved in so many things, writing books, lecturing, but for the purpose of his invitation here is the fact that as a representative of AgBiz, which is the Agribusiness South Africa, he's been involved in, or is involved on a regular basis on some of these issues between private sector, government, researchers. So we would like to hear his insights on that. And online, again, we have Opoku Ajiamang, who hails from the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Ghana. And he's working as an agricultural economist, responsible for monitoring and evaluation. But again, for him, I think he brings expertise around agricultural policy analysis, the program designs, as well as the results in terms of tracking across public sector, as well as the donor community. And I've been told by the Ghana team that is involved in PPVC that he's been quite engaging, involved, supportive of the PPVC. So his insights will be very interesting. We look forward to that. We have from the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock in Zambia, Mr. Succeed Mubanga, who also has more than a decade and a half of experience both in public and private sector, but in the ministry he is responsible, or he's a director of policy, planning and information. He coordinates and also does the monitoring and evaluation of policy programs, driving sustainable development for that particular ministry. I see he's also online, so welcome, Succeed and Opoku. I haven't seen Wandile, but we carry on. And as I introduce the next panelists, they can come online, starting with Ms. Caroline Simushi Chipanga. She is the principal planner responsible for budgeting and budget management. I heard Fuasa and Brian quoting some billions of kwacha. So your work is gonna be quite interesting in here. But from her, she's from the Ministry of Agriculture and Irrigation. As I said, in Zambia, she's also responsible for budget, strategic planning, as well as policy across the sectors and ministries. Zambia has 2 ministries of agriculture. I think someone in the pre-conference mentioned the importance, the relevance, and the role that you get from that. Maybe if we have time, we can engage on that role. I'm going to call upon also Mr. Nana Osei Bansi, who is the CEO of Private Enterprise Federation in Ghana. He has more than 44 decades. That means when Andrew, you were still being hunted, he was already involved in some of these issues from being an executive director of Pan-African Agribusiness Apex Chamber, which is under the African Union. But he also brings some of experiences during this period, serving both in public and private sector. He held positions and roles in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He's been with the Department of, or the Federal Home Loan Bank, again, New York, and also Alliance Capital and JP Morgan Chase. So the role in private sector, role of investment, as well as some of the dreams that we heard about, we look forward to hear some of those insights. And that is the panel, but I would also like to invite Andrew to come on stage as well, not for that process you work through, but as a lead in ISA and the role of coordinating PPVC. That also means that Brian Mulenga, you are welcome to join us on stage, basically to take us through some of the experiences and observations, the journey that in the PPVC process we've gone through. Okay. It is not necessary for me to be standing anymore, so they want to take away my podium. Please don't look at my shoes. Is Mr. Sihlobo online? Can we confirm that, or otherwise then we can just quickly move on? So I'm going to pose questions, brief questions to you as my panelists, and then we can engage further. But if you see me receiving a note, they are telling me about time. That's really not good. No, I'm joking. Apparently, Mr. Sihlobo is not online. So, but we have enough people to really to take on these issues. So I'll immediately come to you, Mr. Succeed Mubanga. We have heard from the presentations, obviously from Brian Chisanga as well as Fuasa. What is the way forward? What is the outlook and the hope for Zambian beef as well as soya bean? But from your role as well as involvement with the planning and information, can you share with us a little bit about how can government engage this information generated from the PPVC or the evidence that comes along with the analytics? Is it something that the Zambian government can take on board, can use it, or can improve on it for PPVC to have some impact in Zambia?
Just speak a little louder. I was not very clear with the question. Just speak a little bit louder. It wasn't very clear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, but you're still quite low.
How about
Are you
now?
able to hear me? Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, I'm almost swallowing my mic, but for you, that's okay. So my question was just...
Thank you.
How does government of Zambia, from the involvement in some of the research and with the research team on PPVC, can use or see it using the data collected, the evidence used in order to convert this analytics into action and impact for Zambian people and stakeholders involved in the two value chains which were presented?
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I don't know if you're able to see me. The video, I'm having some technical issues. But in terms of the PPVC and how government can use that, I think we, like the presenters did mention, we have been interacting in the development of these analytics. And we also take cognizance of the key recommendations that come out of this. So what is important is firstly to note that in terms of evidence-based planning, Zambia has been kind of doing this in the past in terms of trying to map your budgeting, your policies, and also your implementation. If you look at the 8th NDP, that's the 8th National Development Plan. But we've moved a little bit further now to look at the value chains under the CATSIP, and that's where most of this study has has come in. So what are we doing as government? We are actually leveraging on some of the findings of these analytics. I'll give you an example of the issues around standards that have come out of this study. We are in the process of developing the livestock development, which is the first of its kind in the country. And this has actually been one very key input into this legislative framework to be able to say we need to put in place standards for carcasses that will help with the dream of the export of beef, as just an example. So what we're doing is basically trying to get the recommendations that will give us the most impact, but also not just about impact. We have to look at sustainability issues and also in terms of equity. So those are the three key issues from the policy perspective that we focus on. And when we get this information, we have to sieve it along those three key areas. And then, of course, then it informs what we're going to do. And like the example I've just given, we are now having to adjust our legislative framework in terms of the livestock development to be able to incorporate the issues of beef standards, which have been absent in the sector, but are very, very critical to the export market, but also even to the domestic market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that sharing those experiences and how you see it fitting in. I would now move on, check with Mr. Ajiamang, taking it off from the point where Mr. Mubanga did mention how Zambia would take up and use the experiences, lessons, and the outcomes of these processes. Is that the feeling, or is that something that Ghana government sees that way, given where you are? But also, to what extent would this really improve or lead towards policy implementation, buy-in of private sector and society at large? Is PPVC something that features strongly within government policy?
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Facilitator. I'm very grateful for this privilege, and a very good morning to the panel and participants as well. Going back to your question, I think government buy-in is very, very essential in implementing findings or the analytical results from PPVC. And why do I say this? Because government is actually a central policy maker. And in making these policies, he also do implement the policies that has been developed. ISE, together with the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, has had a very healthy relationship, especially in implementing PPVC. Because from the day one, there has been a lot of stakeholder consultation with MUFA, that is the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Again, they helped us to prioritize some commodities using the business case and the developmental case analysis from the results that they had. And together with that, it has helped us to also align this research or the findings from ISE coupled with the government priorities. Initially, government was focusing on looking at export, looking at commodities that will help in developing or getting us to a food self-sufficiency level, looking at food security level. But with these findings from PPVC, it helps us align some commodities that they help us identify, which are the tomato, the rice, and poultry for the first analysis stage. And that is why ANAPRI program. So when government buy-in comes into play in using the PPVC analysis and resources, it helps align this research to our policy priorities. Because when these evidence are produced, it responds to our policy needs, and it also makes it easy for government to implement. In addition to that, I also say that when government is involved, And as PPVC and ISE has done, it also legitimizes the evidence that are produced, because when these evidence are produced and stakeholders are met, presentations are made to them, and it also gives government, it helps government to endorse these evidences as credible and be able to use it across its institutions. And this also helps facilitate the interagency cooperation that is between academia, between research, and between the bureaucratic system, that is the MMDs, the municipal district and municipal agencies and district assemblies. So it also increases political traction. And I'm saying this because political leaders are more likely to support reforms they have endorsed. If they have not endorsed such a reform, it makes it very difficult for these reforms to be implemented. We have had situations where there were evidences, I will not want to mention name of the organizations, and the results were just dumped on the ministry. And as such, as we speak now, the results are just lying on the shelves, not being implemented. So when policymakers are involved in some of these analyses, they are more likely to understand these resources and use them. And they are also more likely to trust these resources. And they also feel ownership of these resources and be able to implement the recommendations. Talking about implementation of recommendations, it comes with resource allocation. And because of that, it will help government to also prioritize the resources to these commodity or these value chains. When ISE came up with the 3 commodities for the first deep dive, that is tomato, the rice, and poultry, government attention was shifted that indeed there is the need to commit a lot of resources to these value chains in terms of developing and meeting our export needs in line with the objectives of the Feed Ghana program that the government is implementing. So it's very, very important whenever these resources are shared with government, whenever government comes in and also take part in the analysis. And taking part, let me quickly mention ISE's involvement too with the ministry staff. I have 2 of my colleagues, I myself also as a focal person, we have had the opportunity to go through with ISE step by step the analytical process using the models. And it has given the participants or the colleagues also a fair idea as to why and the need to implement these resources as and when government take it up in the Feed Ghana program. So let me rest it here, and if there's any further questions, I think I can attend to it. So in a nutshell, government buy-in is very important because it helps government in trusting the results and also implementing the results that has come out of the PPVC value chain analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I almost stopped you because I thought you were going to mention the name of the organization. But also, I had a sense that you are making this room very jealous the way you talk about the uptake of the work, because it's every researcher's dream to see their work, their recommendations be considered by government. But you have also helped with providing some advice on how research that intends to have influence and impact on policy should be done, should engage different stakeholders, most importantly government. So thanks very much for those inputs. And I'll come now in-house. Ms. Caroline, you heard Mr. Ajiamang talking about the policy recommendation being accompanied by the resource allocations. As you were coming up, I was also making a joke about the $160 million that FWASA wants for the infrastructure for the livestock. As someone who is responsible for budgeting, but also being part or being involved with the PPVC processes, in your view, how do these analytics get translated into policy choices, those kind of priorities within the budget lines, but also the delivery mechanisms? Because they made, I would argue, very good points around the benefits and what Zambia can get out of the implementation. However, at the same time, there are costs, there are budgetary considerations to come into play. How do you see that space?
Thank you very much for the question. I think from my perspective is that the real value you get from the PPVC analysis is its ability to turn complex value chain data into practical and actionable insights that policymakers can actually use. The data we get or the interventions we get from the PPVC will show us exactly where the intervention should be and what the impact should be. And talking about that, I want to give an example from the beef sector. From the analysis given, we are told that 80% of the cattle population herd in Zambia is in the hands of smallholder farmers. But there's low productivity because of poor health management, low carcass weight, inadequate infrastructure, and biosecurity issues. And so once we've identified these interventions, we need to link these interventions to budget lines. And how do we do that? As we do our budgets, we need to make sure that we provide funds for biosecurity infrastructure, we provide funds for disease control, we provide funds for food and nutrition, that is pasture, rangeland, and feedlots. In that, we'll be able to accomplish some of these interventions that are being given forward. And I must recommend ANAPRI because by the time this report is coming out, our strategic plan and the National Development Plan are expiring next year. So it gives us an opportunity to include some of these interventions in those two national policy documents, which are very important if we are going to achieve the export ambition that we have as a country. But at the end of it all, the delivery mechanism is also important. So we have our district officers who have been devolved to the local authority. And so all the functions for the ministry at the local level have gone to the local authority. So how do they deliver those interventions on behalf of the ministry? It brings in an issue of collaboration. We need to get to the local authority and start talking. We need to be partners in this journey of us improving the national herd and us achieving the export targets that we have. So because the local authority oversees a certain fund called Constituency Development Fund, and over the years that fund has been associated with constructing of schools, constructing of hospitals or clinics, but now we need to sit around the table to say, look, we have these ambitions as a country, how do you come in as a local authority to ensure that these ambitions are achieved? From that money, they can allocate funds to deal with the livestock infrastructure that are needed, to deal with deep tanks and things like that. At the end of the day, PVC analytics alone is not enough. We need to collaborate. And I'm happy that from the time this process started, we have been engaging with ANAPRI. They didn't sit alone. They didn't sit alone to do this exercise. We went in the field together. At every stage of the analysis, they've been coming back to the ministry to give feedback, and management to engage them to say, let's go this direction, let's move to this level. At the end of the day, we have all these ambitions that we're trying to achieve as a nation put together because of the collaboration that exists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, those are key points, and every intervention has a budget line, and therefore it involves another level. Before I go to Mr. Osei Bonsu, I would like to engage these two gentlemen sitting to my right as the lead. Oh my goodness, I'm giving my back to the room this side. Apologies. These two gentlemen were the lead say facilitators, coordinators, researchers for the respective institutions which you've seen their presentations. But I'm giving you only 2 minutes. You've been involved enough already. Basically just to indicate in this process what surprised you the most, positively or negatively, whichever way. What was unexpected in engaging in this process, but given that the implementation is yet to be to get going, what is the anticipation? What surprised you? What was unexpected? And what do you look forward to? 2 minutes.
Okay. 2 minutes is quite tight. Yeah. But anyway, there's only 2 issues I need to address. I think one is, what surprised me or what surprised us as a team during the process. Well, not really a surprise, but I think the warm sort of relationship that happened immediately the moment we engaged the public sector, government in this case, Caroline and the team. I think this time was quite different. We have done this a number of times, but it would be a very slow process with ups and downs. But I think this one was like a match made in heaven. I think, as Caroline said, probably we came at the right time. And that's the thing with policy work. Sometimes you just get lucky that there's a need for the work that you're doing, and when you approach the policymakers, they'll be very open to work with you. So it was a very positive surprise. Going forward, what do we expect? I think what we expect is that we'll continue on this journey with our colleagues in the government. Yes, we've given them this analytics and evidence, but now we want to move towards supporting them or facilitating the actual implementation. I think Caroline gave a very good, scenario of where we have now decentralized the functions of the government to the local authorities. So we see ourselves being part of that process. How do we get the message to the local authorities? How can they reconfigure their budgets and focus on these other drivers of economic growth rather than just the social areas which Caroline highlighted? Thanks.
So primarily, our strategy has been to ensure that the skills which sits at ISE, BFEB, and ANAPRI, or even IFPRI, is also handed over to the ministries which matter. We do have the Ministry of Agriculture on board. We have the National Development Planning Commission also on board. And then we have the Center for Scientific Research and Industrial. So these three institutions we've been working with. And our hope is that by the time we finish this process, the basic things that they need to do, for instance, to, let's say, look at a value chain like rubber, they should be able to do it. The objective is not to hold their knowledge, but to make it available to the policymakers so that they can also use it. One of the things we find is that people who show so much enthusiasm at the beginning may not always go with you to the end. And those who are slow to pick are rather the people who seem to stay with you for long. So as we move into the policy space, I think it's one lesson we've learned, and we hope to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm looking at the time now, but I think, Mr. Nana, we lost your partner on the private sector, so you are the only one who's going to talk about private sector investment and that kind of partnership. But as I was reading your CV, I wasn't really worried that you'll have trouble discussing those issues. But right now, I just want to maybe ask you three key issues that are critical for private sector participation in a project like this. As you have heard, you have seen the numbers, you have seen the ambitions and the dreams, but generally, when private sector thinks or is faced with a situation as this, what would be the key three things to look into or to share with us on that?
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For private sector, opportunity is the biggest element that we look for. And the government policies that are sometimes or mostly inconsistent make it very difficult for private sector to plan, to invest, and to be able to do what they need to do. So policy prioritization by government is critical. And we have anticipated and we have suggested. Previously it was working, but periodically new governments change their tone, and we have a dialogue platform, a quarterly dialogue platform where you meet the highest levels of government with the highest levels of private sector, to analyze the current situation, to analyze what is not working, to analyze and make recommendations as to how we go forward. Agriculture involves land. It's like going to swim without water. So if we need a land, what are the land tenure systems? What kind of support would the government provide for land ownership? Because these are critical game changers. If you don't have a land tenure of about 10, 15 years for a private sector investment, why would you want to invest? You're investing for 2 days or for 10 years or for 50 years. So land tenure system is critical game changer for the private sector. Now, once you've come to the land tenure, then who are the players on the ground? The smallholder farmers and others need the support that would allow them to invest, to do what is necessary and plan. Ghana, we have land ownership issues. So if we don't make possible for the locals to own the land in partnership sometimes with foreigners, and it becomes a very dicey situation where some foreigners are owning the land and the locals are sitting on the fence, it makes it very difficult. So for private sector, what we anticipate, what we want government to be doing and partner with us is, let's make the land available. And then once we do, resources. What are the resources necessary? The seeds, the financial resources. Every time we talk about financial resources, I think everybody turns around and look at development partners. Yes, they are development partners, but we are the partners that lead in the development. And if we're always looking back to others to come and rescue us, it makes it very difficult. How do we make capital mobilization locally? Pension schemes, long-term funding, those are the critical game changers. If we don't have the resources, no amount of efforts or policy will make it happen. So we look at the financials, we look at the technical expertise, we look at capacity building. The small landowner doesn't have the technical skills, but we can boost their capacity by hand-holding and linking them to various agencies that have the technical competencies to work with them. And these are some of the things that we think that the farmers are the key players. And one of the key things that we always look for, market makers. If you produce in glut and you don't have any access to the market, you're wasting resources. And then the storage facilities that had to be able to store for tomorrow. In certain areas, you have glut. Rice, as I think Prof indicated earlier, we produce a lot. In other areas, we don't. There's a mismatch in their locations and the way that it's being handled. So we think that for private sector, we always want government to be aware of the current situation, plan against tomorrow, and be able to rescue the agricultural landscape, because it's something that we have to do, because Ghana has been importing almost every A to Z of everything, from beef to rice to everything, from poultry, and we think that sunflowers, sorghum and others, we can do all those locally. The capacity is there. We had done that over the years, and we can do again.
Thank you very much. Land, resources, and market resources. Thank you very much, Nana, and the rest of the panels. Let's give them a round of applause. But they are not going anywhere, as we have the audience which has been sitting here. Ooh, I didn't even say it's time for questions, but hands are already up. So let's take a set of questions, and you can ask the presenters or the panelists. I see Ali, Prof, and two. Let's take 4. Okay. There's 2 more. Round 2, Benjamin. Let's keep them short, right? So that we can have another round and more people engaged. Okay. Benjamin?
Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick question to the presentation on soybean in the Zambian presentation. I mean, the two. Now, for soybean, you said the government has been banning export. But I want to ask, are there smuggling activities? Is informal, cross-border trade of soybean taking place in Zambia? That's one. Then on the beef value chain, if I heard you right while you were presenting, it's like you said beef was the least in the ranking, but you still chose it. Why?
Thank you. Soybean, Zambia. What are the export markets and how attractive are they? And secondly, considering the trade tariff war that is going on right now with regards to soybean, how does the situation look like from the export perspective and considering the Zambian case? Rice, Ghana. Production efficiency in rice is low. So would it possibly make economic sense to procure rice from the international market? In other words, when you look at the welfare economics, who are going to be beneficiaries? Who will benefit more? The consumer, the producer, or the government in terms of taxes? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ali from FAO. My question is also related to the, the Zambia presentations. For the beef industry, where do you see the growth is coming from? Is it, increasing head size or increasing productivity, whether it's offtake rates or carcass weights? I mean, it actually matters where growth comes from because it affects resource use. The other question that's related to the beef and soybean is, have you considered the pool from beef by in soybean industry, right? The spillover, right? If you develop the beef value chain, I mean, more feed will be demanded. So have you considered that scenario? Essentially, that also reduces the investment that you need in the beef, in the soybean sector.
Thank you. Prof. Chawla, you'll be the last one in this round. And I see people are willing to sacrifice tea.
Thank you. Maybe mine are both comments and questions because I'm still part of the PPVC. The question is on the soybean, the crushing capacity, and they attribute this to energy as one of the causes. But I'm saying, how binding is this as a constraint to crushing capacity? Because in Malawi we found the similar challenge, and our thinking is the low production, low supply is a key constraint to the use of the crushing capacity. The second one is more of a comment. I like the feasibility assessment that Andrew presented for Ghana. But I think the idea of trying to push all the costs to the government makes some of these to look impossible. And yet, I know a number of them, like the infrastructure, they have public good characteristics, which more likely the government has to take up a bigger role. But when you look at improved seeds, the private sector can easily come in one way or the other. So why can't you take this as something that we can take forward as in the implementation support to make sure that the government sees where it can come in, like in R&D, but including the private sector, instead of just looking at this huge amount of money and taking it to the government. It may really look impossible, but something that is possible under some public-private partnership arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you. Presenters, I think the questions were directed to presenters. You will get the next round. Who wants to go first? Andrew, Brian, Fuasa. Okay, Fuasa is ready.
Hope I captured all the questions directed to me. I think the first one was in regards to why beef was selected, even though it was ranked last amongst the livestocks considered. So when you look at the livestock sectors that are prioritized by the government, you've got aquaculture, poultry, dairy, and beef. Historically, the other three have received considerable attention in terms of policy support when you scan through the documents. When you look at actual investment infrastructure, the other three have got historic significant contribution. So the reasoning when we sat down with the ministry in selecting it was that to get it to where the others are, we need to prioritize it. Yes, poultry is being invested by both commercial and smallholder farmers, and government are happy with how the sector is growing and do not see it as a priority to continue to invest it compared to where beef is. So that was some of the thinking in selecting beef over the others. In terms of where we see the growth coming from when the reform is taken up, is we contextualized the issues of the calving rate, because I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, our national calving rate is on average is 28%, but when we look at good practice, this needs to be higher. So we picked moderate growth to address that issue. We looked at what's it called? Production. So we also estimate that this will increase by reducing the mortality rate. And we also made assumptions based off of the good practice around our regional neighbors. But not just the two. We also looked at the modalities in which the beef is going to be reared. And so the beef volumes also be increased through the feedlots, increasing the carcass weight. So those were some of the issues which will assist our growth. Thanks.
I think there have been some questions around the soybean value chain. One of them was whether there's informal cross-border trade that could account for some of the soya that could be leaving the country. Now, my response to that is there are two products actually that are exported. One is the soybean seed itself, which is the raw product, as well as the soybean meal, which is processed, and it's an input in the feed industry. So of the two, the soybean meal is a larger component, is a larger product being exported to a larger extent compared to the bean. But there have been years where the bean has gone out quite substantially. So in terms of informal cross-border trade, we do not see much of it happening as compared to the formal trade, because there are some of the industries or the processors have these kind of agreements with processors in the other countries. For instance, there are feed mills around the country in Kenya and whatnot, and you find that the feed, the soybean feed goes actually directly through that channel from one manufacturer to the next. So we see very little informal cross-border trade happening. Then there was a question on export markets, which are our markets for soybean exports. So number one, I think I would mention Kenya. Zambia is exporting quite a bit of soybeans to Kenya. We've also exported to Tanzania in some years, I think 2023, but that was not so much destined for Tanzania. It was actually also going in overseas markets. As far as China, when I think the demand was being redirected to Africa, I think this is a situation that we're also beginning to see now, that between the US and China, there are all these disruptions. There could be demand coming from overseas as well. But so just to give an example, that in 2023 we saw our soybean moving from Zambia all the way up to China through Tanzania. I think there was a question on the synergies or spillovers between beef and soybean. I think as the beef industry grows, it begins also to demand for soy through the feed. So there's synergy between the two industries as well, where we're going to see more domestic demand growth in soybeans as the beef industry also begins to grow. So definitely there is some synergy there. There was a question about energy, whether the binding constraint is the electricity supply or indeed just low supply, low supply coming from the domestic market. So yes, I do agree that sometimes there are issues which constrain supply of the raw soybean into the processing industry. For instance, when the El Ninos occur, we find that the supply is quite low and it constrains the production. But indeed, the energy, when we talk to processors, it really came out as a strong, as a very important issue, because there's a lot of downtime during their processing when their machines are supposed to be running and they are completely off. So that really constrained their production. And if you saw during our presentation, we mentioned that it's as low as 33% of the processing capacity. And the capacity right now is standing over 740,000 metric tons of installed capacity. So that is a big issue. I also mentioned export bans. Export bans are also constraining the capacity for utilization, because we're looking at the domestic market, which is quite small compared to the installed capacity. And if we opened up exports, it will just increase to the level that we projected, I think, in one of the last slides. Thank you.
So on the question of to whose benefit, our initial analysis suggests that the primary producers of rice have the highest gross margin across the value chain. So aggregators' margin is not as high as the primary producers of rice, nor the retailers, primarily because a lot of the rice production in Ghana is rain-fed. And so the cost of production is low. Once you are able to produce, you get quite a lot. Then rice produced in Ghana does not also attract VAT. So all primary products or produce, there are no VATs on that. So I don't think the government has an intention of extracting rents from there. But people who do processing and sales, they will definitely pay some taxes. The objective here is a food security objective one. Because there could be a day when Vietnam will say, no rice for Ghana. What do we do? When we've ramped up our consumption from 16 kgs per year to over 40. So we need to pay attention to local production. And our desire for the self-sufficiency is not one of showing off, but preparing for potential disruptions in good times. We are preparing for the resilience now, so that in future, if India decides not to export, we can still have some rice. And Prof, I agree with you that we don't have to put all things on the doorstep of government. And that is entirely our point, that there are some progressive small-scale farmers who are willing to adopt improved seeds and fertilizer. Can we promote them through extension so that on their own they can procure them, or through the what we call rural banks, they can finance some of these things? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and the presenters. I've been told that I have less than 5 minutes. Is it okay if we wrap it here, or will those who had their raised hands up be offended? I will allow it on the basis that we take 3 questions and no question will take more than 60 seconds. You have 60 seconds to ask your question, straightforward.
Thank you so much. Joseph Kanyamga from CAD, Malawi. My question goes to Zambia. Building on Prof. Chiwaula comment, I was wondering why improved seeds are missing in your soya pack, because private sector, could easily venture into that, given your challenges to do with, seed recycling. I also want to understand your domestic demand. Is your production currently able to meet that demand, or you have excess production? To Ghana, what's the status of the seed system currently? You talked about the low motivation. To what extent is it developed? Do we have improved seeds available? Thank you.
60 seconds, please.
Yes. My name is Cliff from the Agricultural Development Fund here in Rwanda. My question was for Ghana. You mentioned there were about 88 warehouses that were currently not being used. I just wanted you to elaborate on the struggles or why that is the case.
Last question over there.
My question is to the man that talk about the private sector. I think he's from Ghana also, a neighboring country to mine. You talk about land tenure system being a challenge, especially for the private sector. What is being done, particularly concerning the greenhouse innovation in agriculture, to be able to help mitigate that challenge?
Yes, go ahead. Last question.
Thank you so much. My name is Anita. I'm from Cheno, Rwanda. My question goes to the last panelist, where he mentioned the policies and the policymakers. I got a question where he said government decides on the land use, the land ownership, and the private sector gets scared of investing in a long-term projects. And it got me to wonder whether is there any stand or any dialogues that are being done about the population increase in the future, which means the demand for food too. And again, the land will not be increasing. And that got me to wonder whether is there anything, any stand between the two, the policymakers and the land users, to navigate the situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. They were really brief, and the answers, I'm expecting them to match the levels in any order.
And very briefly, so for the seed system, especially for rice, it's not as developed as that of maize. But in the last 15 years, we've made some progress. First, in terms of capacity to do the research. The second step is to get seed growers to come on board. That is crucial. And then the third has to do with the issue of cold storage. Because sometimes people pick the seeds from the storage houses, keep it for some time, and before you even go to the field, it started germinating. So there is a whole issue around that. Although now I know there is a policy, so probably that could improve. For the warehouses, yes, under one program called the One District, One Warehouse, each district is being given either a 1 ton or 2 ton warehouse, and that has been built in some of the districts. But to the extent that those warehouses are in central locations, if I have even 30 bags of rice, it doesn't make economic sense to take it there and bring it back. So how do we operationalize those warehouses so that aggregators can manage them, bring the rice and keep them there? Or potentially we get mailing plants close to those warehouses so that after mailing we can put them there. Those kinds of discussions can go on. And with the relationship we have with the private sector and the policymakers, we believe we will do something about it. Thank you.
BC, you had a question to answer.
Okay. I think there was a question on improved seed, whether there's any intervention that we're proposing to actually boost improved seed. Yes, if maybe I could just elaborate just slightly on the second intervention, which we are calling technology levy, introducing a technology levy, and how that is being proposed to work. We're saying that if a levy of just about 1.2% of farmers' production is collected and then distributed to seed companies would actually invest more in R&D, that is around improved seed. And maybe we could have a situation where seed recycling reduces and there's more adoption of hybrid seed retention each and every season, because right now farmers use mostly recycled seed. So that is what we're recommending. I think there was a question around excess production, whether we are actually in a surplus position when it comes to soybeans. The answer is yes. We have the private sector which has heavily invested in the soybean processing in excess capacity. So basically we are sitting at around 740,000 metric tons of processing capacity. So basically yes, what needs to be done is basically boost both domestic demand as well as export. But I could say in short, we are in an export position. And for this value chain to grow any further, we need to allow exports to grow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, BC. Nana, you had a question directed at you?
No, I actually have a recommendation. Post-harvest losses. How do we address that? The private sector has invested in tons, and there's glut in production, but the warehouses are not available or close by, as Prof indicated. Can bring it here and then take it back. So post-harvest losses are the issues that we need to address critically, because other than that, we're wasting the resources. So those are the areas I think we should be meeting with government and finding common ground in a dialogue platform periodically to enhance post-harvest losses.
Okay. Delegates and panelists, presenters, thank you very much. Let's give ourselves a round of applause, because not only did we make this interactive, going to Alan's point when he was providing the overview that this is a complex process. It is slow, it is interactive, and I think in the 2 hours that we spent here, we just experienced that. But maybe before the photographers come here, let me just maybe put across a few takeaway points which came from the panel and the presenters. But maybe I need to preface that by saying that, PPVC, in as much as it is about the technical abilities, the integration of various analytical tools, data, as well as bringing in stakeholders and various agencies, at the core of it is about 3 things: the resources, the people, and the economy. It is about how that combination works to get the outcomes that lead to prosperity, the dream that Fuasa talked about, and all other issues that were raised in here. And I think that is the main message that as we think about, as we ask people in the house, is also about how, at the end of the day, do these resources, the people, as well as the economy combine to lead to those. But just specific issues, and maybe coming from the panelists, the issue of resources, the budgetary allocations, after the analysts and the researchers have indicated how much it would cost, the policy angle needs to come in, assess further. Do we have resources? Can we borrow money? Can we attract investors? Can they make money out of the investment that they make? I think that came across. The second point, which was also in the form of questions, was about, the question came to more or less on beef, to say, if beef was the lowest ranked, how does it end up being prioritized? But this also illustrates the role of PPVC, and it also comes from the discussions, the panel on the pre-conference workshop about governments. They are faced with multiple objectives to achieve, and at a given point, they did not use just the rankings, but they use PPVC as a vehicle to help them address some of the basic or the immediate needs, whichever way government priorities are. In other words, PPVC on its own is not only about what we think as researchers, but how it helps, the government as well as other stakeholders in the process. But so it's not about picking winners, but it is about picking those that are able to address the issues that are at hand in that partnership of decision making. I think the case of Ghana would carry on discussing it, but you get a balance between import replacement versus food self-sufficiency versus what you would need to move the society going forward. I think Mr. Nana mentioned the capacity that is there, but it's the coordination of all those, which is the capacity of the people, the land that he's so, I can tell you that he's passionate about, as well as now how do you translate that into the outcomes that we need. And I would just end maybe with the last point around just the government. I think government participation, we heard how important it is in the process in integrating the research into the outcomes that they are looking into building capacity, but also identifying some of the shortcomings that they have. And I didn't have a sense that they were quite keen to hide some of those, be it from Ghana or Zambia, but to say, with what we have at the point where we are, this is what we are able to do, this is what we commit to do, and let's roll on and focus on what we can achieve. So with those takeaway points, and maybe you have different ones, let's carry on engaging the panel, the presenters, and everyone here. As I said at the beginning, PPVC has we are now on an 8-year journey, and it carries on. So let the fire continue to burn, but most importantly, let it make a difference in our governments, in our lives. So I think panelists, those online, those who traveled here, Brian and Andrew, Brian and Fuasa, you made my job look like I know what I'm doing. But I was just writing on what you are doing. And you, the audience, thank you for keeping up with me or tolerating me. But if I made a mistake, I do apologize. I enjoyed this session. I don't know about you. So thank you very much. Let's break for tea or coffee, and let's make it a 10-minute break, and by 20 past the next session needs to start. So officially, we are on tea break. Thank you very much.